I'm driving through my home country of Iceland right now with my wife, and when I left, I just grabbed my A7S3 just without thinking, like I usually do. And that's what I've been doing for the past 5 years. And since then, this camera has been with me on every single shoot that I've been to and every single trip that I've been to. And I mean, it's survived, snowstorms here up in the Highlands. It's survived heat waves in the Middle East. I've shot F1 with it. I've shot skincare commercials with it. And even now, 5 years after it was released, it's holding up just fantastically. The image quality is amazing. However, in these past 5 years, Canon and Blackmagic and Panasonic, they've all been releasing very good models. And now it's time for an upgrade to the FX3/A7S4. So that got me thinking, what would the A7S4 or the FX3 Mark II need to look like for me to actually want to upgrade? At their peak, some athletes are just untouchable. Think Tiger Woods in 2000, Max Verstappen in 2023. Every great eventually faces the same challenge, and that is to evolve with the times or fade out of significance. And that's kind of where the FX3 sits right now. It's had its championship run, but if the FX3 Mark II doesn't evolve with the times and evolve with the competition, it risks losing its title as leader and just becoming legacy. So here's what Sony needs to do next. The A7S line of cameras was introduced in 2014 by Sony, and since then it's built up a pretty big reputation and a big legacy of being great in low light, great sharpness, great color science, with big shows in movies like Planet Earth 2 and Logan and Slenderman, and movies like that being partially shot by the A7S 1 and 2. And then, it was just a matter of time until Sony revamped the A7S III into a more cinema-style body with the FX3. And, a whole movie being shot on that, like in The Creator. So yes, the A7S line and the FX3 are great cameras, top of the line, and they've proven themselves to be that time and time again. However, like I said, now other manufacturers are kind of starting to nibble at the heels of Sony a little bit with their new cameras. First cameras that come to mind are the Canon C80 with the triple base ISO of 800, 3200 and 12800, so comparable low light, but still having a triple base ISO with 6K RAW, and then the Canon R5 with 8K internal RAW, and the Panasonic Lumix S5 II with 6K open gate, and the Blackmagic Pixis, which I own, having 6K open gate as well and RAW recording. Of course, these aren't like-for-like comparisons. They're different body styles and might be a little bit of a different price point. But the point still stands that the FX3 or the A7S III, they're not completely untouchable anymore, which is not very surprising because the A7S III was released in 2020, so developed in 2019. So we're talking about 5-6-year-old specs here. And now apparently Sony is gearing up for releasing a new entry in this line, whether that be the FX3 Mark II or the A7S IV, hopefully both. I'm more of an A7S man myself. And with the FX9 being discontinued and the future of the FX6 being kind of up in the air, I think that the FX3 Mark II or the A7S IV needs to set the tone for the next few years of Sony cameras, the FX line and the A7 line. And I have a pretty strong opinion of what Sony needs to do with the A7S IV or the FX3 Mark II in order to kind of retain its crown as the best prosumer camera around on the market right now. This isn't some fantasy wish list of crazy specs that we need to cram into this teeny tiny body. This is more of a realistic roadmap of what I think Sony should do in order to stay on top while not cannibalizing their higher end cinema cameras. These are my essentials. At the very top of my list of essentials, I'm putting 6K open gate recording. Nowadays, so many people, including me, need to deliver both horizontally and vertically, as well as anamorphic lenses are becoming way more accessible and way more common among independent creators and content creators and independent filmmakers. So shooting on a 16:9 format doesn't really cut it anymore. Cutting a 9:16 frame out of a 16:9 video is such a big loss of, sensor real estate, and it's such a tight crop. And shooting anamorphic, even 1.5 times anamorphic on a 16:9 sensor, that'll leave you with a 2.67 to 1 aspect ratio, which is just way too long for normal uses, and you can forget about trying to cut a 9:16 frame out of a 2.67:1 aspect ratio. And also, not to mention, some of these anamorphic lenses have like nice character around the edges of the frame, which you lose if you're shooting on a 16:9 sensor and then cropping off all of those edges. Shooting open gate solves both of those problems, both the anamorphic problem and the cropping problem. And you see now some of these manufacturers are starting to add this into their more affordable cameras, like the Blackmagic Pixis and Panasonic with their Lumix S5 II. I don't know the Lumix names. And of course, OpenGate has been reserved for the higher end cinema cameras, but now it's time. The floodgates have opened for OpenGate to trickle down to these consumer cameras like the A7S IV or the FX3 Mark II. And along with OpenGate, I'm also saying 6K instead of 4K. And that's not because I want to watch 6K footage or deliver in 6K or something. It's mainly because, back in the day when this camera came out, the A7S3, I delivered mostly in 1080p, but now I'm getting asked to deliver in 4K, so now I don't really have the option to crop as much into my footage as I could back then because I'll be losing so much resolution. And then also I feel like there are so many creators now doing more like hyper stylized edits, whether that be for Instagram or client work or their own work. And I think that, giving them a little bit extra resolution will help them, be able to do a little bit more, be more creative with their edits, have a little bit more technical leeway and wiggle room when it comes to, what they can do. Ever since I got my Pixis, I've been finding any excuse to use it over the A7S, even though I love it, mainly because I just love the 6K open gates. Even though it's a bigger camera, it's bulkier, it's more difficult to use, it's not as user-friendly, you have to have a big battery, it's not autofocus, nothing like that. I just love the 6K open gate so much that I try to find every excuse to use it that I can. However, one thing I think we don't need in the FX3 Mark II or the A7S IV is internal RAW recording because it fries battery, it fries memory cards. You're going to need more expensive memory cards, you're going to need bigger memory cards, you're going to need a more powerful computer, you're going to need bigger SSDs or bigger hard drives or bigger NAS drives. And it's just not worth it. The FX3 and the A7S, they're for independent creators, smaller creators, especially nowadays, like me or lots of my friends that are shooting like 2-3 projects a week. And if every project is like 500 gigabytes, then it's just not really worth it, in my opinion. It's not worth the headache. So I'm fine with just keeping the 422 10-bit, codec that the A7S has now. I like it. It hits the sweet spot, in my opinion, of file size and image quality. So no internal RAW, please. We don't need it. Sorry, we don't need it. My second essential is triple base ISO. The A7S line has been undisputed low-light king for the past probably decade with a base ISO of 640 and 1280. And, the gap between 640 and 1280 has always annoyed me a little bit. Not super much, because I understand, especially at the time, not all cameras were dual base ISO, and especially not with a second base ISO of 12,800. So it was understandable. But now you got models like the Canon C80 with a triple base ISO of, I think it was 800, 3200, 12,800. So comparable low light performance. So I think Sony needs to add a third base ISO in between 640 and 1280, whether that be 3200 or 4000, somewhere in that range. I could also ask for a higher third base ISO, like instead of 12,800, something like 16,000 or 20,000 instead. But I'm not doing that because, like I said in the beginning, this is supposed to be a realistic roadmap, a realistic spec sheet of what Sony can do. And I think asking for a higher third base ISO at the same time as, you're increasing the resolution to 6K and enabling open gates, it might be a little bit too, complicated or costly or timely to develop that. So I'm fine with keeping the low light performance as it is now with 640, 1280, and then also adding another one like 4,000, 3,200, somewhere in that range. Check out this view. I'm hiking somewhere over there to a place called Stórurð. Stórurð. Another thing I think we don't need is global shutter. Of course, it would be nice to have it, but I don't think we really need it. Again, it might be costly, more expensive. It might, I don't know, it might have some effect on something else regarding the sensor. So as long as the rolling shutter is, in the same ballpark as the A7S now, I'm happy with it. It's fine. I have never ever noticed any significant issue with the rolling shutter in the A7S, unlike, for example, the Pixis. My third essential is better wireless and USB-C monitoring. I use my phone and my iPad to wirelessly monitor my Sony cameras all the time. My A7S, my A7R5, my FX3, either with the the monitor and control app from Sony and the Monitor Plus app from I don't know who. It's great, it's fantastic. However, it's not perfect. It's not equivalent to like a Hollyland or a Teradek or whatever. It's not that high quality. It's, especially when it's wireless, the connection is laggy, it's choppy, it's very high latency, but it's fine. It's perfectly fine because it's something. It's better than something. I have a wireless transmitter just in case. But the thing that bothers me the most is when I plug in my phone directly via USB-C to my camera, the resolution doesn't increase. Yes, the latency gets better and the frame rates gets quite a bit better, but the resolution kind of stays the same. I think it looks like 720-ish p with not a very high bit rate. So I would love for them to put in a better Wi-Fi chip and to allow more throughput for the USB-C so we can get wirelessly like a 1080p signal so we can pull focus maybe and get a bit of a sharper image. And then also when we plug in our phones via USB-C, we can just use that as a proper monitor with like full 1080p, 1440p, 4K even, hopefully, but at least 1080 so we can properly use our phones because, the A7S, the FX3, they're kind of, again, like I've said multiple times in this video, they're aimed towards independent creators that might not have a whole bunch of money laying around to buy, new monitors, new batteries, new wires, new mounts, new cages, all that sort of stuff to kind of allow for a monitor. So being able to quickly use our phones is fantastic. If that happened, I would probably just stop using monitors altogether because I would just like to prefer to use my phone. And now you're kind of starting to see the theme come out in my suggestions or my essentials. And it's not about creating the best, most stacked camera they can make and like the greatest spec sheet around on the market. Rather, just trying to create the most useful camera they can. Creating the camera that makes the life of the independent filmmaker, the independent creator, as easy and as cheap as possible. Because, more isn't always better. In this, camera space, more always begets more. More specs means more power, means more batteries, means more data, means more memory cards, means more expensive memory cards, means more SSDs, means more computing power. So yeah, more isn't always better. So while we're on the subject of monitoring and making life simpler, my fourth essential is more and better UI customization features. Things like custom frame lines, custom anamorphic D-squeeze, false colors, stuff like that built in the on-camera monitor. Because the FX3 is all about being small and nimble. And, if you need to add a monitor on top with an extra battery, with an extra wire, with an extra mount, it makes life a little bit more difficult, it makes the rig bigger, and it's just not nice, especially if you're somebody who travels a lot like me, that wants to keep the rig small and wants to save space in their carry-on and not take all these batteries and stuff with you. It would make my life and the life of many other people so much easier if they had these exposure tools and these composition tools just built into the camera. By the way, look at where I am. And then of course we got those basic 2025, 2026 upgrades like, a better Wi-Fi chip, better Bluetooth, faster data speeds, better autofocus, better IBIS, all that sort of those normal upgrades you get every model year. So the FX3, in my opinion, and the A7S3 by extension, is the greatest prosumer camera ever made. And what makes it great is its price to performance ratio. It's by no means cheap, but it was and still is within the grasp of small creators and small teams. And for the FX3 Mark II and the A7S4, if we get that, hopefully, Sony needs to update their formula a little bit and double down where it counts. Same general price point, same size, just upgrade it and update it where it counts. Because the FX3, like I said, isn't about chasing the most stacked spec sheet anymore. It's about giving small teams, small creators, as many tools as possible in order to enable them to bring their vision to life faster, easier, cheaper, or with fewer compromises. So that's it. That's my rant about the FX3 Mark II or the A7S4. I hope we get the A7 IV. I like the A7 better than I like the FX3. So, hopefully we get those by the end of the year. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.